Good morning. Hi, I'm Dave Lemieux, and I'm here to talk about Giant Stadium 1987, 89, and 91. If you're watching this, you're probably aware that the Dead's new box set for 2019 is from 5 shows spread over 5 years. We've never done anything quite like this. I mean, we've done a box set that spread 30 years that had a show from every year from 1966 to 95. And we've done, of course, last year we did the Pacific Northwest, which spanned 2 years in a row, 1973 and 74. But this is the first time we've done anything quite like this. And this is a really exciting box set. First and foremost, it's got tremendous music in it. And that's where we always start. We always want really, really good music. You know, I gotta say too, I've been filming these videos more and more early in the morning because it's usually a lot quieter, a lot less people around, so there's less distractions for me. Apparently I'm quite easily distracted. And secondly, the weather's usually a lot more calm, so we generally don't have a lot of wind, no whitecaps. It'll generally be more just kind of nice calm water, which we have today. If we get any waves that are going to crash and kind of drown me out, it's because of boats that have gone by. So, Giant Stadium. So, nice and clean, no whitecaps. Giant Stadium, 1987, 89, 91. Now, how this box set came about, oftentimes what we do about a year before a box set comes out, or maybe even a year and a half or 2 years, we start putting thought into things. I know that for next year, 2020, we've already got a really good box set in mind. We're just beginning to check out tapes for that one, by the way. And otherwise, what we generally do is we do kind of look at the vault and see what are good box set ideas for the next 5 years or 7 years. Not to say they'll all happen, but we do have kind of an overarching view of how things are in the vault, which are things that we can release. And so a couple of years ago, we were putting some work into the Meet-Up at the Movies. As you know, that's our yearly thing where we do a Grateful Dead concert, put it in movie theaters, and we've done 9 of them. This year, of course, was June 17th, 1991. More on that show in a couple minutes. But we did put some thought into doing a Giant Stadium Meet-Up at the Movies. And I was really torn a little bit between doing the 1989 show, one of the 89 shows, or doing one of the 1991 shows. Now, the 91 shows have always been very high on our radar as something that we've always wanted to do, because the second night in particular is truly an epic Grateful Dead show. The first night's also really good, as you're going to hear in this box set. So I kind of put a lot of thought into it, and I talked with Rhino about this and kind of my dilemma between a Giant Stadium show from 89 or 91 for a Meet-Up at the Movies. And somebody at Rhino, a very good friend, Doran, suggested, well, what if we put one out and then maybe in a year put the other one out? And then from that became the discussion, or maybe we could do a Giant Stadium box set from shows for which we have multi-track tape. That's something we'll get into in a second as well. And what that also meant was that we have the 1987 show, for which we don't have video in the vault, so that was never considered for a Meet-Up at the Movies, but the 89 shows and the 91s were. So over the course of several months, it was actually around the time a couple of years ago we were working on the RFK 89 box set when this idea started being thrown around about doing something from Giant Stadium, because the Giant Stadium shows are really good. I even like them more than the RFK shows, and part of the reason the RFK project happened before the Giant Stadium is because we wanted to do Giants as the 5 shows, the 87, the 2 in 89, and the 2 in 1991. So what we did is we've taken the multi-tracks from all 5 of those shows, and the reason we didn't go into the later Giant Stadium shows, which they did play there quite a bit later on in the 90s, after 1991, they also played there in 1978. We don't have multi-track recordings for those shows, which doesn't mean they won't come out, but as part of this box set, we wanted to make sure that this box set had a kind of sonic unity, if you want to call it that, because the multi-tracks were so good. They were all recorded by John Cutler, and if you are familiar with Without a Net, the Spring 1990 box sets, Hampton 89, the Warlock shows, Nightfall of Diamonds from 10/16/89, all of those shows were also recorded by John Cutler. So there's a consistency to his recording technique when it comes to multi-tracks that really makes this, I think, again, it's a unified whole of the recordings of this. And so we've got these incredible 24-track tapes from the first 3 shows in the box, 87 and the 2 89s. Now 1991 is an interesting one. Those were the shows that were recorded to multi-track and to multi-camera video, specifically for possible inclusion on that ABC In Concert 1991 TV show the Dead were on. It was just a little half-hour show, maybe an hour, and they only played 3 songs, and the rest ended up in the Grateful Dead's vault, plus those 3 songs, of course. And I guess ABC, or maybe it was John, I don't know, insisted on recording to 48-track. And what that means is that instead of all of Billy's drums being on 4 or 5 tracks compressed together, and all of Mickey's drums also being on 4 or 5, you were able to put each of the drums onto their own track. So you've got maybe 15 tracks, 20 tracks for the drums combined, maybe 8 or 10 for Billy, 8 or 10 for Mickey. So we've got that, and we've got so much audience ability to mix in audience, which you'll hear in the surround sound mix on the DVD, which we'll get to that in a minute. And so Jeffrey Norman, here we are in August, I'm making this in the end of July of 2019. Jeffrey Norman has spent the bulk of the last 6 or 7 months at Bob Weir's studio in Marin County, California, TRI Studios. And Jeffrey's been in there mixing this project. And he mixed it chronologically, starting with the 87 show right up to the last one on 6/17/91. And then what he was doing was, as he was mixing, he was sending the mixes every night to myself and to Dave Glasser. Dave Glasser, you're probably familiar with. He's our mastering engineer for so much of what Jeffrey doesn't do. Jeffrey does most of the Dave's picks and previously the road trips and the Dick's picks, and he mixes all of the Dead's projects. And he also does a lot of other things, whereas Dave does all of our studio recording remasters for the 50th anniversary things, all of the high resolution stuff. And Dave also does, he's been working with us for about 15 years. These waves, these are the boats I was talking about. Boat waves coming in from way out. Like I haven't seen a boat go by in a long time. So that's how long they take to get over here. This is a 23-mile straight shot across from, I'm on the Canadian side, and it's 23 miles. I don't know if you can see those mountains over there. That's the American side, 23 miles away, Port Angeles, Washington. And so Dave Glasser does all of our mastering that Jeffrey doesn't do. Usually different types of projects. Dave will do the studio stuff, the surround stuff, and anything that Jeffrey mixes, for the most part, Jeffrey's preference is that somebody else masters it, somebody else, of course, being Dave in Boulder, Colorado. So Dave has been mastering these, again, for about the same length of time that Jeffrey's been mixing. As soon as that first CD worth of material, which is to say the first set of Giants 87 was done, Dave started mastering it. So we've spent 6 months on this, and then the last couple of months were really spent on the DVD portion of it and the meetup at the movies portion, specifically, of course, June 17th, 1991, a show that, I mean, I don't know if it needs much introduction. If you were a tape trader or if you were seeing shows at the time, this is really an upper echelon Grateful Dead show. I think all 5 of these shows are incredible. So I'll tell you a little bit about each of them. So the 87 show, July 12th, 87, was part of the Bob Dylan and Grateful Dead tour. This is the final night of the 3 nights that were on the east coast of this tour. They did Foxborough on July 4th, and then Philadelphia at JFK on July 10th, and then Giants on July 12th. I was fortunate to have attended this show. I was 16 years old, the Giants 87 show. And I remember even then, this is only my 4th Grateful Dead show, I remember the energy being through the roof. And it was a big stadium, 65,000 people, but I do distinctly remember feeling that this energy, the band, could bring this huge stadium to life. And it was a daytime show, or the Dead came on early, like 5 o'clock or so. And I distinctly remember how alive it was, particularly during a lot of the first set. Songs like When Push Comes to Shove and Bertha and West LA Fadeaway, Hell in a Bucket. And remember, In the Dark had only come out a week before. So this was all a lot of fresh stuff, tons of Steel, Brent's song. So extremely high energy. It really, I think the best way to describe it, this show really captures the spirit of 1987 Grateful Dead. And this is the essence of Grateful Dead 1987 music. Extremely high energy, precision. The tempos were all really good and consistent. And again, I think the best way to describe is that it captures the spirit of 1987 Dead, which I love 1987 Grateful Dead. So the second set of this show Giants 87 begins, it was the only show I ever saw this happen, began with Morning Dew. I remember the band came out, they were tuning up and everybody was kind of cheering, getting excited. The band was about to start, and then out of nowhere, and you'll hear this, the band just starts playing Morning Dew, and it's a really good Morning Dew. It's it's not 9/18/87. If you're talking 1987 versions of Morning Dew, it's not quite the one they played at Madison Square Garden in New York City 2 months later, but it's really, really good. And so they open up the second set with this Morning Dew, and it rolls right into playing in the band. Now, the previous two Dylan and the Dead shows in Foxborough and JFK, the Dead were only playing one set, one very long set, similar to what they'd done a little bit in 86 and then also in 78 on July 1st, 78. They did one set, but a long set where they kind of did first set material that just kind of flowed into second set material. This was the first one of the Dylan and the Dead sets where the Dead did two sets. So the second set is a little shorter than it might have normally been if Dylan wasn't on the bill as well, so they still had another hour and a half to go. So we get Morning Dew playing in the band, and then a really nice drums and space, and this is drums and space before MIDI and all the sampling had come in. So this is the pure sounds of drums and space. This is not to say in a pejorative way anything about the later drums and space, but this is very different. That's why I say it captures the spirit of 1987 Grateful Dead. And then out of it is, again, a lot of very good precision, extremely well played Grateful Dead of the other one. Stella Blue, Throwing Stones, and Not Fade Away. Throwing Stones, of course, one of the newer songs from In the Dark. The other one, a throwback to 1967, 68. Grateful Dead. So a really, really wonderful show. Short, 2 CDs. That's why this box set is 14 CDs and not 15. It's 5 shows. First one is 2 CDs, the rest are all 3 CD sets. And no encore, and the reason there was no encore is because right after this, the Dead came on with Dylan, which we didn't include in the box set, for an hour and a half. They played, and then they did a couple of encores, including Touch of Grey, the big triumphant In the Dark song. So that's our 87. 89, 2 years later, the Dead come back to Giant Stadium for the first time in a couple of years, almost 2 years to the day, on July 9th and 10th, on what I consider to be one of the most consistently great tours that I ever saw the Grateful Dead play, and that might have even been in the last, decade of Grateful Dead performances. Shows like Foxborough and Buffalo on July 4th, and JFK and the two Giants, the 2 RFKs we released a couple of years ago. And then those were followed by the first ever Deer Creek Grateful Dead show, and then they ended the tour with Alpine Valley, that classic run of shows on July 17, 18, and 19. So the Giants 89, now here they come into town, and they've had this huge success 2 years earlier with In the Dark. They've got all this new material that was going to be released later in 89 on Built to Last, and they were even better, I think, than they were in 87 when they came back in 89. So they open up the first night, there's songs like Shakedown Street and West LA, a great first set with a terrific Bird song in it. Second set, remarkably good, tight, concise, wonderful stuff. Really good. And then the second night, I remember this so distinct. I attended these shows as well, these 1989 shows, as a grizzled tour veteran at 18 years old who'd now seen more than 4 shows. But they were really fun shows. This whole tour was really fun, the 89 tour. But the second night, I remember, it was a terrible rainstorm. The show started later. I think the first night might have been a 5 p.m. showtime or 7, I don't know. And then the second show was 2 hours later. It was a day of the week. I can't remember what it was, but it was a 2 hour later. So the show started when it was supposed to start, when it was just getting dark, whereas the first show on July 9th had been more of a early evening, late afternoon almost show. And I remember the weather was horrible, and John Scherer came out and he said, look, everybody, you've got to clear the stadium, go walk around the concourse, but you've got to clear the floor. That was it. They got to clear the floor of the stadium. And I wasn't taping these shows. I did tape some shows on this tour, but I remember being in my seats. I was about 40-yard line towards the stage on Brent's side. So about 10 rows up, 15 rows up. And I remember most of the people on the floor left because there was a big lightning storm coming, and so they left the floor. But the tapers, of course, wouldn't leave. Like, the tapers had all their taper gear set up, and they had their microphones and their tape decks, and the last thing they were going to do is leave thousands of dollars of material of equipment behind and go seek shelter. So you've got this almost empty floor. The stadium bowl was still full of people, but you've got this almost empty floor with this pocket of a couple of hundred tapers. And they're the ones with the 8, 10, 12, 15 foot mic stands, and they're the ones probably most likely to get hit by lightning with their mic stands. It was a very bizarre scene. So the weather passed, and then finally the Grateful Dead came on. It did rain during the show, but the bad weather, the lightning storm, passed. Dead came out, opened up with a tremendous Feel Like a Stranger, Franklin's Tower. Now Franklin's Tower, remember, when the Dead weren't playing Help on the Way and Slipknot as part of the repertoire, I'm thinking after 1977 until 1983, those 5 or 6 years, and then from 86 to 89 when they brought it back, shortly after this show, when they brought it back in Hampton, Help and Slipknot, Franklin's kind of didn't have a home. It would sometimes be half-step Franklin's, Feel Like a Stranger Franklin's, sometimes it would just appear in a second set or a first set. And this is towards the end of Franklin's Tower being kind of homeless and floating around. Only a few more versions before they started playing Help on the Way and Slipknot again in October of '89, when from then on Franklin's would be attached to Help on the Way and Slipknot. Thankfully, I really like that combination, but in saying that, I was always a huge fan of Stranger Franklin's, and this one is really, really good. Great music never stopped in this set too. Great second set. These shows, I love these shows in '89, and again, recorded by John Cutler, mixed by Jeffrey Norman at Bobby's state-of-the-art studio that was largely built by John Cutler, by the way, and then mixed by Jeffrey there, and then mastered by Dave Glasser. Plangent was involved in this. You might be aware of the plangent processes. It's a way that we do our transfers from the analog tape to the digital world that basically, I don't know, I'm not a recording engineer, but essentially brings the analog tape to life, to as though it was the day it was recorded, as though you're listening to it right off the tape machine it was played on, in perfect speed, in perfect everything. So the plangent process is extremely valuable process for a lot of projects that we do, and Jeffrey Norman is kind of the arbiter of whether this project needs it or not. If it's from a DAT, then we don't, but if it's from an old reel-to-reel or a multi, Jeffrey will oftentimes say that something is needed, and in this case we went with it and it sounds amazing. And so that the '89 shows, great stuff. 91, so 1990, the Dead do another big tour, mostly stadiums again, but they didn't play Giants. 91, they returned to Giant Stadium. I did not attend these shows in 91. I did go to the next couple of shows in Detroit, or just outside of Detroit at Pine Knob, but I remember getting to Pine Knob, and I got a phone call the day before Pine Knob, the day after Giants, raving about this June 17th show, and the 16th. A lot of people kind of forget about June 16th, but it is a wonderful show. It's got a great first set, really great, with a great Stagger Lee and Let It Grow, and it opens with a great Picasso Moon. It's a great Rooster. And the second set of the first night has a great Jack Straw, second set Jack Straw. It's got a China Rider that doesn't open the set, which is really cool. So there's a lot of really good Throwing Stones Not Fade. There's a lot of really good music at Giants on the first night. Really wonderful stuff. And again, this was also recorded to 48 track. So the music you're going to get, the sound you're going to get on the June 16th is, frankly, it's unlike anything you've ever heard from the Grateful Dead live. And I mean that. This is not hyperbole or misstating. This is the first ever live recording by the Grateful Dead to 48 track analog tape, 48 track period. They did record Dead Set and Reckoning to 32 track back in 1980, but that was two 16 track machines synced up, whereas this is two 24 track machines synced up. That's how you get 48 tracks, by the way. You take two 24 track machines. 24 track is when you get 2-inch analog tape and there's 24 individual heads recording each of the instruments. That's what this means. If you're not, I know I throw this phrase out, 24 track, 48 track, 2 track, whatever. And what that means is that each of the individual instruments or vocals or audience tracks can be recorded to its individual tracks, so that in the mixing you can blend it to make it sound like a proper live album. So this is the first time I've ever heard this, and it's I can tell you it's the first time you've ever heard this. This is the Grateful Dead from a 48 track source, and it's never sounded quite like this. The clarity, the balance, everything about it is a little different, and frankly a little better than anything you've ever heard. It sounds wonderful. So the first night, it's an under the radar show, and I think it's because it lives in the shadow of June 17th, 91. Justifiably so in a way, because this June 17th show we're about to talk about is truly, it's a show that I've known for many years. Obviously, I was a tape trader, I am a deadhead, but it's a show that it's hype, just like Cornell, just like Veneta. I think that it's hype. It certainly lives up to the hype that it's always had. So this is the show, of course, that opens very famously with a huge Eyes of the World. Opens, first set, Eyes of the World. The Dead didn't do this. This is, for the Dead to do something like this, it indicates they were about to perform a show. I mean, I'm not getting into their heads or anything, but when they do something like this, it means that they know that they're feeling it and something special is about to happen. Now, a lot of special things happened at this show. The set list itself, remarkable. We'll talk a little bit about that. I'm not much of a set list person, because to me it's all about performance quality, and if the performance is really, really good, I don't care what they play. I really don't. But this show has both the performance quality and the set list. So this is, first of all, there's a lot of things to talk about with this show. We've got the Eyes of the World opener. We've got a very rare, by this point, by 1991, this was very rare, Might As Well to end the first set. Might As Well, you know, you're listening to Dead shows in 85 and 84, and there's a lot of Might As Wells, but there's not a lot of Might As Well in 1991 at all. I only saw, of the 100 or more shows I saw, I only saw the Dead play Might As Well twice. Once in 1988 and once in 91 at the Cap Center in Landover, Maryland. So you got this incredible first set with, you got a great Cassidy, but what you all, Brown Eyed Women, masterpiece. It's a good show. It's so good. It really is. But what also happened throughout this show that you might know about is that they weave, and I don't know if Bruce Hornsby, remember, Bruce Hornsby is at these shows. It's another thing. I don't even know if I mentioned this. The first three shows in this box feature Brent Midland on keyboards. Of course, 1990, he passed away, and then Vince Welnick joined the band with Bruce Hornsby kind of as a part-time, full-time, kind of official, non-official member of the Dead. And the two shows from 91 feature Vince and Bruce on keyboards and piano and accordion and vocals. And so, throughout the show on June 17th, they weave Dark Star in and out of the show. Now, they had played it at RFK a few days earlier, but this was just weaving it in and out of the show, and you'll hear a first full-blown Dark Star. I don't even want to say tease. It's like a minute and a half, and it's full-blown Dark Star. They play this Dark Star in the first set as it goes into When I Paint My Masterpiece. So that's the first one. Throughout the second set, though, they weave it in and out again between songs, and I think there's a total of maybe 4, 5, or 6, it depends how you look at them, of these little Dark Star, whether you want to call them teases or you want to call them full-blown little snippets, whatever you want to call them, that's up to you. I'm not going to put a label on it, except for the fact that it's always there, it's always present, and it's always kind of bubbling under the surface. And I really mean that, because if you listen to this show very closely, and I encourage you to, I always encourage you, put on the headphones, play it loud, play it focused. I try to really focus on Grateful Dead music when I listen to it, excuse me. I listen to a lot of other music that to me is more passive music. I can garden while I listen to that stuff, I can cook, I can talk to people. But when I listen to the Dead, I tend to make it more of a focused listen, which I encourage you to do on the show, because as you listen, you will hear throughout this show many times, particularly Bruce, playing the Dark Star riff. In the middle of the melody of a song, he's such a talented musician as a guy who, in the middle of a song, can throw in the Dark Star riff without missing a beat, without changing the direction of the song, without changing the melody. Maybe the other guys barely even notice, but it's there. And you'll hear it on this mix. Again, with the 48 tracks, the clarity is really there. So you've got this Dark Star, and Dark Star is pretty much the most, I don't know, the most sought after Grateful Dead show by Deadheads to see at shows. I mean, for a lot of people. And so you've got this Dark Star thing happening, and it happens a lot. It's, again, the full-blown snippets, half a dozen, and then this thing Bruce in particular keeps doing are really, really amazing stuff. So you've got this incredible second set too that features Uncle John's band, Saint of Circumstance. Come on, this is a great song that they don't play very much. Again, of the many shows I saw, I only saw 2 or 3 Saint of Circumstances, which is amazing. And so we've got Ship of Fools and Saint of Circumstance, trucking into probably one of my favorite versions of New Speedway Boogie. Now remember, New Speedway had been out of the repertoire for 21 years, from 1970 to February of 91, and they brought it back in Oakland in February 91, played it a little bit in the spring, and then the summer a little bit, they played it onward. But great New Speedway, and the Uncle John's band is incredible at this show, and then the full-blown Dark Star, without vocals, but they play a good 6-7 minute complete Dark Star jam. Drums and bass. The post drums is also really unique. There's a China Doll, there's a playing in the band, reprise. Reprise from what? They didn't play it at Giants. It's amazing. That's kind of how inspired they were. And then a really rockin' Sugar Magnolia. To end things off with The Wait. Again, another great song. You get The Wait by the band wrapping things up. So this box set, beautiful packaging. Now, as you're probably aware, in the last maybe 5 or 6 years, the production team behind our box sets, behind the Grateful Dead's box sets, have been nominated for Grammys for 4 times, I think now, 3 or 4 times. Grammy nominations, including Pacific Northwest, I believe Cornell box set, the second Spring 1990 box. So it's the same team that's been working on those. It's Doran and Lisa and Steve. Everybody, you know, is bringing, oh, little bird. Everybody kind of brings these incredible talents. So the packaging is what you've come to expect from the last several box sets. Sound quality, we've talked about it quite a bit. Impeccable. Liner notes, tremendous. Gary Lambert, Jesse Jarno. Great stuff. Photos, incredible photos. Bob Minkin, Jim Anderson, lots of others. Great stuff throughout this box set. Again, this is one that it's something we've never done before. We did the Pacific Northwest where we did 2 consecutive years, 73, 74, but we've never done 5 shows spread over 5 years in 87, 89, and 91 from the same venue. And we're really happy with this. It really tells kind of a story. Very different music each year. Again, 87, unlike any other year in Grateful Dead history. And again, this show, I listen to a lot of 87. And this one really captures that spirit of 1987 Grateful Dead. And then we also have 89 when the Dead were playing this tour that I think everybody considers one of the best. The tour that was started to be recorded for a possible consideration of Without a Net. And then in a little bit was used on it. Without a Net was much more in the fall, was drawn from the fall in the spring of 90. And then, of course, the 91 shows, which the first night of 91, June 16th, is again a little under the radar, and that's because of the excellence and the fame of June 17th. It's kind of like Buffalo 77 and Boston 77 and New Haven. Phenomenal shows, but they're kind of in the shadow of Cornell. And unfairly, fairly, I don't know, but when you hear them, when you hear this Giants June 16th, you'll hear kind of an excellent, excellent Grateful Dead show. And then you've got the final night, which again, oh, and the other thing is this, the box set also includes the DVD or the Blu-ray, your choice. When you order it, you get to choose if you want to get the Blu-ray or the DVD of Giants the final night, and it sounds and looks amazing. The same production team that's worked on all of our DVDs and Blu-rays the last maybe decade or so. Oh, you actually going back to Video Arts. You might have seen the name Video Arts in a lot of Grateful Dead projects the last 20 years or so. Same team there, Kim and his whole crew, Lauren, the editor, great team there. We got Rich Winter as our DVD and Blu-ray authoring guy, and he's in Marin County. So we've got a team in place that has done so many Grateful Dead projects with passion too, that the quality you've come to expect from all of that is here in spades. So it's really, really good. 14 CDs, limited edition. I don't even know how many it's limited to, but it's limited. These things do tend to sell out. This is a cool thing because we get asked sometimes to put out maybe a little more Brent or some Vince and Bruce stuff. This fits that bill quite a bit. 3 full Brent shows, 2 full Vince and Bruce shows, and all 5 of them are magnificent shows, and they're all from multi-track, so they sound better than anything you've ever heard. They're really great. These are really, really great shows. I'm excited about this box set. I've been working on it for 18 months, almost 2 years, but really hardcore about 8 or 10 months, where Jeffrey and I started calling up the tapes and getting the transfers done, and the mixes started, and Dave started mastering. So this is exciting. So I do encourage you to go check it out. There'll probably be some listening parties. The DVD's amazing from June 17th, 91. It's got a surround sound mix. Jeffrey mixed the whole thing in surround. And surround from 48 track, you can have a lot of fun. So if you have a surround sound system at home, I highly encourage you to check this one out, because Jeffrey did have a lot of fun with his surround sound mix. I'm not saying it's anything other than appropriate sounds, but with 48 tracks you could put some sounds back there and over there and maybe over there and maybe over there and down there in the sub, and so it sounds good, really good. And Phil had a new bass on this tour, and again it sounded wonderful. I remember seeing the Pine Knob shows a couple of days later in 91 and just was blown away by how good Phil sounded. Everybody sounded good. Band was on fire, all three of these eras. That's the cool thing, is that Summer 87, Summer 89, Summer 91 with Bruce and Vince. These are three peak eras of the Grateful Dead, peak tours, and so we kind of packed it in there. 14 CDs, 5 complete shows, wonderful stuff. Thank you for listening. I'm Dave. Go over to dead.net, check it out. Probably won't be available too long, maybe it will, I don't know, but I highly encourage you to get this one. It's a really good box set, and what it's done is now that we've completed it, we've started looking into our 2020 box set, which we've pretty much settled on, and we're going to start work on that pretty soon too, because we've got a busy 2020 coming up and a busy 2019. We still have some more really exciting things coming up later this year, some really good stuff actually. So check it out. Thank you very much really for bearing with me and listening, and thankfully no whitecaps. Weather's been good, it's not been too loud, and it's always a pleasure. Really, thanks for joining us, and thanks for supporting what we do, because we love doing what we do and bringing you music and box sets and things like that. So thank you.